Hi everyone, I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest on today's show is the UK's leading ufologist, Nigel Watson. I'll be talking with him about his book, Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited, High Strangeness, British UFO Cases. Nigel Watson, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
Hi, good to be here.
Your interest in investigating high strangeness UFO cases began when you watched the Steven Spielberg movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. What, Nigel, was there about Close Encounters that sparked your interest?
Well, it had a lot of publicity in Britain. All the tabloids had features on it, and it also encouraged newspapers to gather their own UFO stories from people in Britain, just to show it wasn't just an American phenomenon. And also, the people publicising the film sort of advertised it with all the different UFO categories. Alan Hynek had promoted Close Encounters of the First Kind, the Second Kind, and the Third Kind. So, in a way, we're trying to educate the public about what the title actually meant, because only us sort of UFO geeks really knew what it meant. And I think it also, at that time, cinemas were far more important. There weren't streaming services and people seeing previews except on a few TV trailers and that. I think it also come out on the back of Jaws, which was extremely popular in Britain and, well, throughout the world, really. But having Jaws a sign of quality from Spielberg, people were expecting a lot from the film. And I went to the preview screening of it in London, in Leicester Square, in a huge cinema, and it was a bit clinical, really. But obviously, the film was very impressive, especially on a big screen and very loud soundtrack. And the ending, where the musical notes are played to the alien spaceship, are fantastic. And then the special effects were sort of mind blowing for that period. I think the only other science fiction film of that era was really 2001: A Space Odyssey. That had really set the benchmark for these things. And for Spielberg to bring UFOs to our own planet was fantastic. And I was really impressed by the film. And later, about a month later, I saw it in a public cinema with a packed audience. And that was far more enjoyable because people responded to the film. And I think at the time I wrote that you don't have to go on a UFO skywatch. You just have to go to the cinema and see everything, really. And I think it was a big boost to ufology in general. And in Britain, it did encourage a lot of people to contact UFO groups. And Jenny Randall set up something called the UFO Investigators Network, which my own group was a member of. And what she passed on sort of high strangeness cases to people who'd be able to investigate them. So she was based in Manchester and I was based in Scunthorpe. So any cases that were sort of over to the east of England, she passed on to me. And so a lot of cases came from her, and due to the publicity from Close Encounters, because I think before then people were reluctant to talk about anything other than lights in the sky, that sort of thing. My UFO group, the Scunthorpe UFO Research Society, had investigated lights in the sky and that sort of thing. But it was a bit frustrating, really, because we'd sort of interview the witness and check astronomical data, that sort of thing. And often we'd find out there was a credible explanation. Sometimes witnesses see a light in the sky which impresses them, but when you investigate it, it's not really that impressive. It has an explanation, but sometimes people don't really want to know the explanation. I think they'd rather keep the mystery. But it was a bit frustrating if you're trying to get evidence, because that's why high strangeness cases were of interest, because people couldn't be mistaken if they said they saw a spaceship land or an alien nearby. And also, myself and other people at that time were inspired by the writings of John Keel, who, rather than extraterrestrials, he spoke about ultra-terrestrials. So it seemed to make sense that people who reported UFOs and paranormal events were seeing something beyond anything we'd previously expected. And that's how this book really came about in the late 1970s, really, because I'd investigated some cases, and then I collected more cases and put it together in book form, because a lot of my writing went to a magazine called Magonia, which was published by John Rimmer, originally from Liverpool, and then he was based in London. And that covered lots of articles about John Keel's ideas. So that gave me an original outlet for my writing. And then it inspired me to put it together as Portraits of Alien Encounters, which came out as a book in 1990 in the end, a few years after I wrote it. And now Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited just gives me the chance to go back to those cases, take out some of the chapters that I felt were a bit irrelevant, and I've added some new cases and new findings at the end, really.
Jacques Vallée and John Keel, who you just mentioned previously, are two of the world's most renowned ufologists, and their work also influenced you. In what ways, Nigel, did their work impact your work?
I think what it did was say to look at the witness in the round rather than just interview them about, say, a UFO sighting or encounter. They encourage you to speak to the witness about any other incidents that had happened in their life. And so after interviewing people about UFOs, they asked them about if they'd had any other experiences. And a lot of times people said they had weird paranormal experiences, coincidences, dreams, nightmares, and quite a lot of people report sightings from when they were children. And that seems to happen. People have a lifetime of encounters with ghosts and UFOs and strange phenomena. And that was something the works of Vallée and Keel brought out. I think also they emphasize the historical context of these cases. John Keel wrote about mystery aircraft in the 1930s and phantom airships of the sort of pre-World War One period and Foo Fighters. And Vallée looks at sort of things like Fatima and religious visions and kind of re-examine them in terms of a UFO phenomenon. And also Jacques Vallée looked at folklore and fairy lore, and he compared the fact that people who saw entities in the past thought they were seeing fairies and gentlefolk and pixies or whatever, which were comparable to UFO sightings today, where people were seeing all manner of strange entities and beings. In my book, Paul Bennett reports seeing a 3 foot high little creature with his friend, which he called a mini man in black. And it's strange, a lot of people do report seeing lots of different shaped entities and not just the spindly greys, which in a way Spielberg's film kind of introduced the whole idea of spindly aliens with large heads and long arms and legs. And I think that influenced a lot of later encounters where people reported such things in my book, because a lot of the people I spoke to had these experiences before the film. A lot of their aliens and things are completely different from the Spielberg image of an alien. And you find that again, if you poke just beneath the surface, people are reporting all sorts of different entities. I've read about a couple of cases where people said they've seen high entities, whereas the traditional greys and the spindly type alien is a more mainstream construct, really.
To follow up on what you were just talking about, flying saucers, unidentified flying objects, food fighters, ghost rockets, phantom airships, chariots of the gods, whatever you call them, strange things have haunted our skies since the dawn of time. Instead of grappling with theories and speculation, you, Nigel, spoke with ordinary people in the UK who have reported seeing UFOs, having encounters with alien entities, men in black, and angelic beings, and experiencing other types of paranormal phenomena. Is it possible for you to share one or two of their stories?
One particular chapter about Paul Bennett is one of the first people I interviewed through UFO Investigators Network. And he was a sort of young teenager when I met him, but he'd already written lots of little booklets about his UFO experiences. And he said when he was about 8 or 9 years old, he'd seen a UFO fly past his bedroom window. And he'd also had a gang of friends that had quite a few different ghostly sightings. And like I said earlier, he and a friend saw a little man in black who was about 3 foot high crossing the road. And I think about mid 1970s, he and a friend were walking near their home, which was near some moorland, and they saw a sort of 12-foot high green robot scooping up soil into its pockets on its belly. And although he only briefly saw this, he and his friend said it kind of glided along, then scooped some more soil and went again. So that was quite an unusual sighting. And I think some people would dismiss childhood cases as being all about imagination and fantasy. I felt I should interview anyone who reported anything to me, really, because I felt like you don't really want to edit out things. You want to collect it all. And then, like with a book, I've put it there for people to assess themselves, because the whole thing about ufology is research is always evolving and new ideas come along. So a case you might have rejected years ago would be appropriate to look at today. I didn't really try to filter out anything because I felt it's a valuable time to collect things in the late 70s onwards. And I'm pleased I did that. And I think Paul Bennett's fascinating also because he had a prophecy once. He was cycling with his friend and he saw a really dark cloud, and he had a prophecy that something really strange was going to happen related to death. And I think about a day later, he was riding on his bike and the chain jammed on it and he went flying into a tree. And he ended up in hospital with a fractured skull. Remarkably, after just a few days, after surgery, I think he might have had 1 or 2 lots of surgery. He went home and he made a really good recovery. And then when he was recovering, he found out that a woman had seen a UFO over the hospital on the very night he'd been admitted. So he kind of felt that the aliens had acted as a kind of guardian angel for him on that night. That's quite impressive because quite a lot of people have said UFOs have saved them in a similar manner, or have foretold disasters of some kind.
Included in your book is a really astounding experiences of a man and woman named Paula Green and Stefan Labosek. What, Nigel, were their experiences?
Stefan's case is good because he saw aliens that looked like what he called pink panthers, and that's kind of quite a striking image. I think it sort of emphasizes more like the facial structure, but his experiences are more like modern day abduction experiences, where I think he found himself on an operating table and was examined by aliens, and also his family have had all sorts of different paranormal experiences happen to them. And the same with Paula Green. She had quite a few different events in her life from childhood. One of her first encounters was with a friend. They went walking in some woods at night time, and they came across this really strange thing, almost like a windmill like thing with big propellers on it that were turning, and it was extremely strange to her. And it had sort of lights on it, and we couldn't really explain it. And when she got home, she thought only about an hour's time had passed. But when she got home, she found that people were looking for her because she'd been away for like more than 3 hours. So there was a chunk of missing time there that she couldn't explain. And other times she's come across strange entities and had strange experiences. I think she had one or two examples of where she felt she might have been abducted, but some of these memories are a bit hazy. But she's got memories of being in a control room and seeing images of beautiful landscapes that then get trashed and tarnished and destroyed. And that's another thing from a lot of UFO abductees, that they were often shown things on a screen which can be quite disturbing. And also with Paula Green, she's had experiences with feeling a crocodile entity sort of touch her and scared her. And I think, though, because she's not been hypnotically regressed, you'd have probably got more information from her about her abductions. But in Britain, we kind of really do hypnotic regressions, and I think they only tend to be done if somebody really needs to have it done for other psychological reasons. But often, people who just see lights in the sky might be hypnotically regressed and then recount an abduction, but you don't know whether some false memories are being created through hypnosis. So I think it's quite useful to get all this information from someone who hasn't been hypnotized. But, Paula Green's experiences are a bit closer to our own time period now. And yet they overlap with Paul Bennett's really, because she lives south of Bradford and Paul Bennett lives north of Bradford. So there seems to be a lot of things going on in that area of northern England.
What theories, Nigel, do you have that could explain the sightings and experiences that have been reported by so many people who came from diverse age groups, social backgrounds, and locations?
I think what I find dangerous is to overriding explanation for everything. Like used to explain everything as, say, alien spaceships. Then it was Keel in his ultra terrestrials. But I think it's more complex than that. I think each case in my book, you could use different ways of looking at them and explaining them. I think one or two might be what you might call purely psychological, but you could say, well, if they're just purely psychological, why have they manifested in a way that talks about aliens and being whisked away on board an alien spaceship? And some of the more credible ones, you wonder perhaps there's these theories that balls of plasma can affect human behavior or memory. It's called the sort of geophysical theory, where they think that something like plasma or tension in the Earth's crust can cause plasma balls, which can have a sort of psychological effect on you. I'm not sure that really applies to any particular case in this, but even if you just look at one person, you might think one or two experiences might be explained by mundane things, but one or two others you think, what is really going on, and why are some people reporting things that happen throughout a lifetime, whereas most of us are lucky to see one UFO, and even then you might be skeptical of it and just pass it out of your mind, which makes me think of what I call the trigger effect, where some people see a UFO and then it triggers a memory of earlier UFO cases, of experiences with the unknown, and then they start researching the subject, and then they realize they've been seeing UFOs and had alien experiences throughout their life without really taking much attention of it. And some people then might change their own lifestyle, they'll become vegetarian or become promoters of saving the world and that sort of thing. So whatever the source of a UFO, it can have quite a powerful effect on somebody's behavior and how they look at life. And I think it's true of just being a ufologist. You read about all these stories and you begin to realize there's more things going on than nuts and bolts reality. And it takes you a bit out of yourself and to look, is something really going on out there? Or even if there isn't anything coming from outer space, what's really going on? Like you said, literally millions of people are seeing UFOs, and probably thousands of people have seen UFOs close up or alien entities. And it seems to carry on. The talk of unidentified anomalous phenomena, the UAPs and drones, has taken the spotlight away from abductions and people having encounters in their bedroom, or you never really hear much about close encounters anymore. It's also interesting that Spielberg's actually making a film that might be called Disclosure. So it looks like he's looking at what we now call UAPs rather than the kind of spaceship of the past, really. So it'd be interesting to see what he does with the UFO narrative.
Since you have been involved in the UFO phenomena for decades, I was wondering, Nigel, if your ideas about the subject changed over the years.
Like I said, the extraterrestrial hypothesis seemed quite natural to me. I was really keen on the Apollo 8 space missions, and then I followed the Apollo missions to the moon landings, and I was quite excited by space exploration and that we'd end up going to Mars and things like that, and science fiction films in general as well. So I think it seemed quite logical that people were seeing alien spacecraft from an advanced society or civilization. Also, quite a lot of people reported seeing landed UFOs with aliens in space suits, but you don't seem to get much nowadays. But back in those days, if you look at old issues of Flying Saucer Review, there's numerous stories of aliens with spacesuits, helmets, and using equipment to analyze and to pick up rocks, a bit like Paul Bennett's robot. It seemed to be on a mission to collect things. So it seemed kind of natural that these were alien craft. I think what broke my ideas was really John Keel and Jacques Vallée's writings, really. But a lot of these sightings don't seem to be of substantial craft, or the aliens act in really odd ways for aliens from another planet. And I think John Keel in particular emphasized these stories of men in black acted in a very odd way, like they were in control of their body. They were almost like robots trapped in a human body or something like that, and they didn't quite know how to operate it. And Kill gives quite a lot of spooky stories like that. And also because I investigated these high strangeness cases, I was thinking, well, they don't really sound like traditional aliens, really. They sound like stories that are people having almost psychological encounters, that these things are dominating my mind through dreams, nightmares, and strange experiences. So I did become interested in the psychological aspects of the subject, and also looking at the history of phantom airships, because I think some of these things are shaped by the kind of society and culture we're living in, so that we interpret a light in the sky now as a UAP, or in the past, in the Second World War, pilots were seeing Foo Fighters, and then before the First World War in Britain, people saw lights in the sky and called them, phantom airships, and they were frightened of, Zeppelin attacks. The name flying saucer gave an umbrella term that allowed people to finally investigate the subject. Whereas something like phantom airships, it was just a passing phase, really, and people went on to other things. But with flying saucers, I suppose at the time people thought, oh, it's just a passing phase, it'll die. But it's been resurrected over time by going through different name changes from flying saucers to UFOs, and then people sort of at the end of the last decade saw triangular craft over Europe, and then in the early part of this century, people have seen all sorts of things that at one time were dominated by Chinese lanterns. There's no wave of sightings of orange globes in the sky, which are just party lanterns being set off, which you don't hear about much now. But at the time, people wondered what was going on. And then nowadays, it's are we seeing drones, and what sort of drones are they? Drones made by secret inventors? Are they being sent by foreign agencies, or are there non-human intelligences behind them? So in a way, the names change, but the thing behind it all is still going on, really. And I think with the UAP thing is that it appeals to looking at the subject in terms of it being perhaps these really are drones that have been secretly created, so that they present a national security threat, particularly to the United States. So there's that argument about it, but there's no other argument that these highly advanced craft that can go underwater and that they can psychologically affect witnesses and have the kind of effect on people that flying saucers were said to have done in the past. So the name might have changed, but the actual game itself hasn't changed.
I would like to now follow up on something that you just said. How, Nigel, do the high strangeness cases you've investigated relate to the current interest in UAPs?
Well, I think they segue quite nicely into the new subject, really, of UAPs. I think bubbling underneath it are stories like from Skinwalker Ranch, where people go there and then they go home and feel like they've had some sort of demonic or alien entity follow them home, which is something else some people have experienced with ghosts. They've gone to a haunted house. The haunting has carried on wherever they've moved to. And with the people I spoke to for the book, they did have lots of really strange experiences, which would fit in with a theory that sort of that aliens are manipulating human beings, and that's something people say these UAPs are doing. I'm not sure what. It depends on the type of people you speak to in America, really, but there's quite a few promoting ideas of Jacques Vallée, really, that the powers behind these strange encounters have lurked in the shadows since the dawn of time, and that they're manipulating us. And I think it's true, there is this manipulation, but you could argue, is a manipulation coming or being beamed at us from afar, or is it our own psychology and our place in society? We're in times where technology reigns, whereas in the past, people had weird experiences that were termed in religious, using religious labels, like the Virgin Mary and things like that. Whereas nowadays everything's couched in a sort of secular, technological manner. So is it just something that if we look at the sky, we just interpret things into what we expect to see and fit it into this sort of template of aliens from outer space or non-human intelligences, to give them their new name? So I think the fascinating thing, a lot of people have come up with different ideas, like that sort of people I interviewed subject to fantasy proneness, and some argue that a lot of the bedroom encounters are sleep paralysis cases, but I don't think you can use them all as catch-all explanations, and that's why I find it difficult to give a sort of overall explanation for all the cases in my book, really. I think you have to look at each case and incident in its own terms. And in a way, I'm basically trying to collect this information for other people to look at and use it as a foundation for more study, because I'm not really an expert in all the different areas you could explore. So I think it's good for other people to look at that.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yakker want to buy Portraits of Alien Encounters Revisited and also learn of the other books you've authored, how, Nigel, can they do that?
You can go on most online retailers. Amazon's a good place to look, and also Collective Ink is a publisher of Portraits of Aliens Revisited. So Collective Ink's the publisher's website. And they also do some other good sort of UFO, alien, and New Age books as well. And quite proud of having this book out because it's a good time to have it out, and when there's so much debate about the subject.
Nigel Watson, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yakker. As always, it has been a pleasure yakking with you.